What if the story you were taught, the neat arc from primitive beginnings to modern mastery, was not a rise at all, but the faint afterglow of something far older? Imagine peeling back the surface of history and finding not a single timeline, but layers of forgotten worlds compressed beneath our feet, each one rising toward brilliance before vanishing so completely that only scattered whispers survived. The monuments we revere, the myths we recite, the inexplicable gaps in humanity's early leaps forward. None of them are beginnings. They are remnants, fractures in a narrative once rewritten to keep our age from seeing how fragile civilization truly is. Because beneath every continent, beneath the drowned shelves of ancient coasts, beneath even the rhythms of our own blood, there are traces of a world that ended so abruptly its memory could survive only through shadows. And if that world was not the first, then everything we think of as human history may be nothing more than the latest chapter in an unfinished cycle still turning beneath us. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. Long before the first symbols were pressed into clay, before the earliest fires lit the walls of painted caves, something older moved through the world like a quiet undercurrent, an inheritance that would later surface only in fragments scattered across continents. You can feel its echo in the sudden appearance of monumental stonework, in the precision of alignments no early culture should have mastered, in myths that linger like bruises on the collective memory of humanity. These traces do not behave like the beginnings of civilization. They behave like the remnants of something already mature, something shattered and then buried beneath the sediment of time. When you follow these clues, they do not lead toward a cradle. They lead toward a grave. And it is in that grave, beneath the weight of forgotten eras, that the first signs of an erased world begin to rise through the cracks. Imagine standing at the edge of a desert where the wind carries sand across an expanse that was once a thriving plain. Beneath the dunes lie riverbeds that no longer flow, and foundations carved by hands we cannot name. Satellite imaging reveals straight lines and geometric shapes hidden under layers of shifting earth. Archaeologists describe them cautiously, speaking in terms that avoid acknowledging intention, but the shapes remain too regular, too measured, too deliberate. They resemble the bones of cities swallowed by centuries of desiccation. Yet no known culture claims them. No oral tradition speaks their name. They are the kind of silence that appears only when something has been wiped so thoroughly that even memory has lost its grip. Far to the east, in lands carved by rainforests long before human arrival, structures rise from the undergrowth with an authority that does not match their surroundings. Enormous stones, fitted with a precision modern engineers find difficult to replicate, stand untouched by the centuries that rotted wood and wore away softer soils. Their edges are smooth, their angles exact, and their placement suggests knowledge of both astronomy and the pulse of the earth itself. These monuments do not reveal themselves easily. Vines disguise their forms, moss cloaks their surfaces, and soil presses tight against their older foundations. But when cleared, when the jungle yields even a fraction of its secrets, The workmanship speaks of minds accustomed to mastery rather than experimentation. It is as though the builders were not discovering new techniques, but remembering old ones. Across the oceans, beneath waters that once formed coastlines during the last great ice age, another series of puzzles emerge. Submerged terraces rise in steps too symmetrical to be shaped by currents alone. Walls extend in straight lines across the seafloor. Entire platforms lie buried in silt, their precise geometry visible only through sonar sweeps. When divers descend, they find patterns that mimic architecture: corridors, plazas, elevated walkways. These structures rest far below the levels where ancient storms could have washed them away. They lie in the deep, where only the end of an era could have placed them. If they were built when the land was dry, it means their creators lived at a time when sea levels were drastically lower, an era erased by floods so violent that coastlines were redrawn across continents. Yet these sites, though separated by oceans and epochs, share a strange resonance. Each one appears abruptly in the archaeological record, already perfected. There is no chain of prototypes, no rough versions preceding refinement. They simply appear, as if carried by memory rather than invention. Civilizations typically grow through trial and error, through generations refining the work of those before them. But these structures behave like the final echoes of a knowledge dying out, not the first attempts of a society learning to build. The people who later inhabited these regions told stories that seem, on the surface, unrelated. Myths of sky fire that scarred the land, tales of water rising to swallow entire kingdoms, songs about wise ones who came from cities now lost beneath the horizon. These accounts are scattered through cultures divided by thousands of miles and thousands of years, yet their themes converge with unnerving clarity. Each describes a world that changed suddenly, violently, and without mercy. Each speaks of survivors wandering through landscapes that no longer resembled the homes they once knew. And each preserves a memory of knowledge that did not belong to the age in which it reappeared. When scholars encounter these myths, they often separate symbol from substance, dismissing the details as embellishments layered over generations. But myths do not persist for millennia unless they carry something essential. They may shift in tone, language, or imagery, but at their core lies an event too significant to forget. What if these stories are not metaphors? What if they are the only surviving testimonies of civilizations erased so thoroughly that ruin was the only inheritance left behind? As modern researchers dig deeper, both literally and figuratively, they find physical anomalies that support these whispered memories. Stone blocks cut with machine-like accuracy in eras supposedly devoid of such skill. Artifacts embedded in geological layers far older than any accepted timeline allows. Structures that reflect advanced understanding of geometry and celestial cycles. These are not isolated puzzles. They are pieces of a larger mosaic, one stretching across continents, eras, and oceans, hinting at a prelude to human history that does not fit within the boundaries of conventional chronology. But perhaps the most striking evidence of a forgotten age lies not in stones or myths, but in humanity itself. Genetic markers appear in isolated populations across the globe, clusters of traits too rare, too consistent, too scattered to be random. These markers enhance endurance in extreme environments, improve adaptation to sudden climatic changes, and heighten certain instinctive spatial abilities. They behave like remnants of a survival event, carried by the descendants of people who endured something catastrophic, something that reshaped the world faster than any migration or technological shift could explain. These traits appear in places historically associated with flood myths, ancient coastlines, and regions where submerged structures linger beneath the waves. They do not follow expected migratory patterns. Instead, they align with the pathways survivors might have taken as they fled rising waters, falling ash, or a sky darkened by forces beyond their understanding. They are not proof of an advanced civilization, but they are proof of survival. Survival under circumstances that nearly erased humanity. Taken together, these fragments, the ruins, the myths, the genetic echoes, form a faint but persistent outline of something older and deeper than our recorded past. They suggest that humanity did not rise in a single, unbroken line. Instead, it rose from the remnants of cycles long forgotten, each one building atop worlds destroyed by upheavals so complete that only the heaviest stones and the deepest memories survived. If this is true, then our story does not begin with agriculture or the first cities. It begins with a silence left behind by something far greater, a silence filled slowly by a species trying to remember what it once knew. The world we inhabit may not be the first to stand at the edge of discovery. It may be the latest in a succession of civilizations, each reaching toward brilliance before encountering the same turning point, the same collapse, the same burying of everything except the fragments too stubborn to die. And as we examine these fragments, piece by silent piece, a haunting possibility emerges. The past we have lost may be far larger than the history we have kept. If the ruins scattered across deserts, mountains, and seafloors hint at civilizations lost to time, then the forces that erased them must have been immense, powerful enough not merely to damage cities or disrupt societies, but to tear entire worlds from their foundations. The stories preserved in ancient traditions speak of floods, fires, long darkness, and winters without end. For centuries, these tales were dismissed as metaphors, cultural memories transformed into myth. But when placed beside geological records, ice cores marked by ash, sediment layers shaped by sudden sea level rise, pollen records frozen mid-transition, the myths do not read like fiction. They read like eyewitness accounts of planetary upheaval. Imagine a world where the sun dims for months, where temperatures plummet with shocking speed, where crops fail simultaneously across continents. Such events are not conjecture. They have happened before. Volcanic supereruptions have ejected ash so dense that daylight nearly vanished. Glacial collapses have unleashed torrents that reshaped coastlines in mere days. Comet debris entering the atmosphere has triggered climate anomalies lasting centuries. These upheavals were not polite shifts in weather. They were violent resets. Yet what makes the story haunting is not the existence of such events. It is the regularity with which they recur. Earth moves through cycles, oscillations in tilt, wobble, radiation, magnetic intensity, and oceanic rhythm. Each cycle brings periods of extraordinary stability, during which civilizations flourish, and then periods of violent change, during which everything fragile collapses. Geological records show these transitions clearly: abrupt shifts in temperature, chemical anomalies in rock layers, sudden changes in sea levels. They appear again and again, spaced across tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient cultures understood these rhythms intuitively. They encoded them in calendars, in star maps, in the orientation of megaliths. Some structures align not with present celestial events, but with those visible thousands of years earlier, suggesting the builders tracked cycles long before modern science rediscovered them. It is as though they inherited an awareness of catastrophe rather than acquiring it through observation. Their stories speak of worlds before the present one, of suns rising in strange skies, of survivors guided by knowledge they did not fully comprehend. When researchers trace flood myths from cultures separated by oceans, languages, and epochs, the parallels border on uncanny. The Andean highlands recount a season of darkness so complete that people could not see their own hands. In Australia, the oldest oral traditions describe the sky raining fire. Polynesian navigation chants speak of islands swallowed overnight by waves taller than any storm surge known today. The Levantine region carries memory of a flood so massive that its waters erased cities and reshaped entire valleys. Even in the far north, where winter is familiar, stories depict a cold so sudden and severe that forests cracked apart under the weight of frost. These stories should not align, yet they do, repeatedly, in tone, detail, and emotional memory. Such consistency is not typical of myth. It is typical of trauma passed through generations so deep that it becomes woven into the cultural fabric. Trauma that does not fade even when the world around it changes beyond recognition. One of the most striking geological events matching these stories is the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near glacial conditions roughly 12,800 years ago. Temperatures across the northern hemisphere collapsed in a matter of decades. Ice sheets surged, sea levels fluctuated. Dust spread across continents, and in ice cores taken from Greenland and Antarctica, a thin layer of black carbon appears at precisely the same depth, evidence of massive wildfires burning across thousands of miles. Something ignited those fires. Something brought the cold. Something disrupted the climate so violently that ecosystems collapsed almost overnight. But the Younger Dryas is not unique in Earth's timeline. There are older layers, deeper layers, each marking catastrophic episodes separated by long intervals of stability. In one era, ocean levels surged by hundreds of feet. In another, volcanic ash cloaked the sky for years. In still another, extreme drought desiccated entire continents. Each event was capable of erasing civilizations, especially those clustered near coastlines, the very regions where early cultures are believed to have flourished before the sea swallowed their traces. If multiple cycles of rise and fall existed, each punctuated by catastrophic resets, then the absence of continuous archaeological evidence makes sense. Stone endures, but memory does not. Wood rots, metal corrodes, textiles dissolve. Structures built near oceans are the first to vanish when waters rise, and even the most enduring monuments can disappear under ash or sediment. Over tens of thousands of years, the surface of the world rewrites itself. But beneath that surface, deeper than the reach of ordinary timelines, geology preserves hints. In some regions, layers of sediment contain micro-charcoal from fires so widespread they must have burned continents. In others, abrupt changes in isotopic ratios show chemical shifts in the oceans consistent with massive meltwater pulses. These signatures appear in clusters, repeating at intervals that align suspiciously well with the cycles described in myths. If these upheavals were responsible for ending earlier civilizations, Then it raises the question of how anyone survived at all. The answer may lie in the oldest stories, those that describe small groups fleeing to mountains, caves, or distant highlands. In many cultures, a chosen few are guided to safety by knowledge older than their time. These remnants then wander into new lands carrying nothing but fragments of memory, fragments that re-emerge generations later as sudden leaps in agriculture, architecture, and astronomy. This would explain the strangest pattern in early human development, the abrupt appearance of knowledge far beyond what should have been possible for societies only just emerging from subsistence living. The earliest farmers in the Near East cultivated crops with an efficiency that implies inherited wisdom. The builders of early stone monuments possessed an understanding of geometry that appears suddenly rather than gradually. Calendrical systems capable of predicting celestial events appear in multiple cultures without any clear point of origin. These are not signs of invention. They are signs of recollection, recollection of something learned before the world fell apart. Even the earliest maps, those etched onto stone or carved into metal, show coastlines that no longer exist, coastlines submerged after the end of the last ice age. They speak of lands that would have been habitable only if an earlier civilization had lived during a time when oceans were far lower. The accuracy of these maps is difficult to explain without assuming someone once charted those regions before they disappeared beneath the sea. But all of this, the myths, the geological signatures, the sudden leaps in knowledge, raises a deeper, more unsettling question. If the world reset multiple times, why were those earlier civilizations unable to preserve their knowledge? The answer may lie in the nature of the catastrophes themselves. Floods wash away libraries, ash collapses roofs, freezing temperatures shatter infrastructure, and over long enough time, even stone erodes and collapses. Knowledge, unless preserved intentionally, is vulnerable to both nature and time. Some cultures seem to have understood this. They built with stone when stone was not necessary. They encoded information in alignments rather than symbols. They embedded memory in myth rather than scrolls. What survives from those choices is faint, but it is consistent. Alignments remain even when carvings fade. Myth persists even when languages die. Stone outlasts parchment by millennia. Taken together, the evidence suggests not merely a cycle of geological change, but a cycle of human forgetting. Each era rose on the remnants of the last, inheriting what could be salvaged and rebuilding without fully understanding the origin of what they carried. Each age believed itself to be the first, unaware that it was only the latest chapter in an ongoing pattern shaped by forces larger than civilization itself. If the world did indeed host multiple eras of complexity before ours, then the catastrophes that ended those eras were not anomalies. They were inevitabilities, moments in which Earth reasserted its rhythm, reshaping the surface and erasing the fragile imprints of human achievement. And if that rhythm is returning, as modern signs increasingly suggest, then understanding what happened before is not a matter of curiosity. It is a matter of survival. If the cataclysms of the past stripped the world clean and buried entire civilizations beneath deserts, seas, and ice, then the ruins rising from the forgotten deep are not the only clues to an erased humanity. To understand the scale of what once existed, we must follow the currents into the silence of the oceans, because the first great cities may not have stood on land at all by the time our age began, When sea levels surged at the end of the last glacial era, they did not rise gently. They raced upward in violent pulses, swallowing coastlines, river deltas, and entire continental shelves. Tens of millions of square miles vanished beneath the water. If a civilization had flourished along those ancient coasts during an era when the seas were hundreds of feet lower, its cities would now lie far beyond the reach of traditional archaeology, resting in darkness where sunlight has not touched for 10,000 years. The first hints of these drowned worlds came not from divers or explorers, but from sonar waves echoing against shapes they should never have found. Grids of straight lines, terraces carved into stone, broad platforms rising from the seafloor like the ghosts of vanished kingdoms. In many cases, the structures stretch for hundreds of yards, too uniform and too intentional to be mistaken for natural formations. Nature does not lay out boulevards. It does not carve stairs. It does not build right angles on the scale of architectural planning. And yet the ocean floor is littered with these impossibilities. Take the submerged site near Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan, where massive stone terraces rise from the depths. At first glance, skeptics insisted the formations were the result of fracturing sandstone. But divers who followed the lines of the structure realized the fractures formed patterns, parallel steps, angular cutouts, flat platforms positioned as though intended for public gathering. The deeper they went, the more the formation behaved like a designed complex. Drainage channels appeared where none should exist. A triangular courtyard lay oriented towards the cardinal directions. Even the spacing of the steps suggested a scale meant for human movement, not geological accident. If Yonaguni were the only structure of its kind, it might be dismissed as an anomaly. But similar formations appear across the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, the coasts of Southeast Asia, and the shores of the Americas. Some lie in relatively shallow water, accessible to divers. Others rest so deep that only advanced submersibles have glimpsed their contours. They share two defining traits: geometric precision and placement along ancient coastlines that existed before the last great floods. The lost city described in ancient Sanskrit texts, Dwarka, was long believed a myth until sonar mapping revealed long walls and rectilinear structures sprawled across the seabed near modern-day Gujarat. Columns, sculptures, and carved blocks lie scattered through the silt. Marine archaeologists recovered pottery and tools from the site, many older than the supposed founding of the first cities in the region. The descriptions preserved in legend tell of a city swallowed overnight by rising water. The ruins match the story with unsettling accuracy. Farther southeast, along the now submerged Sunda Shelf, sonar sweeps reveal what appear to be causeways stretching for miles, harbor basins carved into what were once river mouths, and rectangular foundations large enough to support monumental structures. During the height of the last glacial period, this region formed a vast landmass connecting Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, a fertile plain crisscrossed by rivers. When the oceans surged at the end of the Ice Age, the entire shelf vanished beneath the waves, taking with it whatever cities or settlements once stood there. The hints that remain suggest an organized, extensive culture, one whose scale would challenge our assumptions about humanity's earliest achievements, and the pattern extends globally. Near the coast of Cuba, deep-sea scanners detected massive stone blocks arranged in grids resembling city streets. Off the Bahamas lies the Bimini Road, a formation of fitted stones so regular in shape and alignment that debate still rages over whether it is a natural formation or the eroded remnant of an ancient breakwater. Even in the Mediterranean, beneath waters that once lapped at the edges of early settlements, submerged ruins appear near Cyprus, Malta, and Crete, their foundations too precise to be written off as chance. What ties these structures together is not simply their existence. It is the silence that surrounds them. Many of the most promising sites have been restricted or removed from public research. Permits vanish. Funding disappears. Military zones expand inexplicably to cover newly discovered ruins. In some cases, divers who documented structures found their images confiscated or classified before they could be published. The reasons given vary: environmental concerns, maritime safety, territorial disputes, but the effect is the same. The deeper a discovery reaches into forbidden history, the less accessible it becomes. This suppression aligns disturbingly well with the pattern found in terrestrial ruins. When sites challenge the accepted timeline, they are often dismissed, minimized, or quietly locked away from public view. Underwater ruins pose an even greater threat to conventional narratives for one simple reason. If they existed before the seas rose, they belong to a period long before the accepted dawn of civilization. That means humans were building cities when textbooks insist humanity was still scattered in small, nomadic groups. Such implications do not merely rewrite a chapter of history. They rewrite the entire foundation of our understanding of human development. They suggest that the rise of civilization was not a slow climb from simplicity to complexity, but a resurgence from the remnants of an earlier world. The presence of complex underwater ruins also aligns with another enduring clue: the shared memory of floods across cultures. These stories, found from the Arctic Circle to the equatorial jungles, describe oceans rising faster than anyone could flee, mountains becoming islands, and entire societies carried into oblivion by walls of water. Science now confirms that global sea levels rose hundreds of feet at the end of the last ice age, not gradually but in violent pulses triggered by glacial collapses and meltwater surges. A flood on that scale would not simply devastate coastal communities, it would erase them entirely, leaving only those who lived far inland or at high elevation to recount the catastrophe. If advanced civilizations existed on those ancient coasts, then the rising seas would have swallowed them whole, taking their monuments, their archives, their technology, and their memory into darkness. Only fragments, stone foundations heavy enough to resist the currents, would remain. The survivors of such devastation would be forced to begin again, scattered across mountains and inland plains, carrying shards of knowledge without the means to rebuild its full structure. Over generations, their descendants would form new societies unaware they were rebuilding atop the ashes of the old. The memory of the flood would persist, shaped into myth. The memory of the cities would fade, swallowed by the sea. In this context, the abrupt appearance of agriculture, monumental construction, and advanced cosmology in the early Holocene begins to look less like a miracle of invention and more like the echo of a forgotten inheritance. The speed with which early societies organized themselves, constructing megaliths, planning cities, tracking celestial cycles, suggests they were not learning from scratch. They were remembering. But if the drowned ruins of earlier civilizations lie scattered across the ocean floor, then humanity's current understanding of its past is only the surface of a much deeper narrative. We have been looking for our origins in the wrong places, in river valleys, deserts, and mountain caves, while the remains of the earliest chapters lie far beneath the waves, waiting for a world willing to acknowledge them. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but not perfectly. Sonar maps, stray artifacts hauled up in fishing nets, and whispered dives by explorers all paint the same haunting outline. Once, long ago, the sea did not cover what it covers now. Once, humanity may have built wonders along shores that no longer exist. Once, a world rose that was not ours, and then it fell, leaving only its bones in the deep. If the oceans hold the drowned skeletons of forgotten cities, then the stones that remain on land, towering, precise, immovable, are the monuments of civilizations that either survived the ancient cataclysms or rebuilt upon knowledge rescued from them. These structures rise from deserts, mountains, high plateaus, and dense jungles, each one whispering the same impossible message. The earliest phases of their construction are the most advanced. In history as we're taught it, architecture evolves slowly from simple huts to complex monuments. But in the real world, the deeper archaeologists dig beneath many ancient sites, the more sophisticated the craftsmanship becomes. It is as if the oldest builders were not discovering new techniques, but preserving fragments of a mastery inherited from a vanished age. The Giza Plateau stands as one of the most striking examples. The Great Pyramid's alignment to true north is so accurate that even today's engineers struggle to match it without advanced instruments. Its dimensions encode mathematical relationships that appear in astronomy, geometry, and the behavior of planetary cycles. And yet the official timeline places it in an era when copper chisels and wooden sledges were supposedly the height of engineering. Beneath its weathered casing stones lies a core of megalithic blocks so massive and precisely fitted that no mortar was needed. When sands were cleared at the base, geologists found water erosion, evidence of rain in a region that has been bone dry for thousands of years. This suggests an age far older than the civilization credited with its construction. In South America, the story echoes with uncanny similarity. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, massive stones weighing dozens of tons interlock with a precision that defies modern replication. The blocks are cut in irregular shapes that fit so tightly together that not even a sheet of paper can slide between them. Some stones have 18 or more sides, each angled to connect with its neighbors in a manner resembling a three-dimensional puzzle. The Inca themselves, widely celebrated for their engineering, admitted that these foundations were the work of an earlier people, builders whose methods they did not possess, only inherit. Above the megaliths lie later additions of smaller, less precise stones. The pattern is clear. The oldest work is the strongest. The newest additions are the weakest. Knowledge faded, not improved. Across the ocean, at Teotihuacan in Mexico, the layout of the ancient city mirrors celestial patterns with such precision that modern astronomers still study its alignments. The Pyramid of the Sun sits atop a cave modified into a symmetrical chamber, suggesting the builders oriented their structures not only to the heavens, but also to subterranean energy sources. The Avenue of the Dead runs along an astronomical axis connected to a specific star's setting point thousands of years before the city is believed to have existed. Such alignments imply either incredible predictive ability or inherited knowledge from an older epoch when the sky appeared different. Even more mysterious are the buried pyramid fields of China. Many rise from the earth as forested mounds, officially classified as burial sites. Yet the geometric regularity of their slopes and the orientation of their edges point to a sophisticated architectural plan. Ground-penetrating radar detects chambers beneath some of these mounds, constructed from stone blocks cut with a precision matching that of South American sites. The similarities between these distant regions, the angles, the material choices, the astronomical orientations, suggest a shared architectural lineage far older than the cultures currently associated with them. But what is perhaps most astonishing is not the size of these ancient monuments, but their resilience. Earthquakes have shattered modern cities, yet many megalithic structures stand unbroken. Floods have erased modern coastal towns, yet the oldest stone foundations remain rooted in place. Time strips away the softer layers of history, leaving only what was built with intent to endure. And what endured is overwhelmingly the work of cultures we barely understand. Another clue to the presence of forgotten civilizations lies in the strange global distribution of cyclopean walls, massive stone fortifications built from blocks so large that legends credit giants or gods with their construction. These walls appear in Greece, Turkey, Italy, Peru, Bolivia, and parts of Asia. Their styles differ slightly, but their core engineering principles are identical. Enormous polygonal stones fitted together without mortar, each one shaped to match its neighbors in perfect structural harmony. Such uniformity across continents separated by vast oceans raises unsettling questions. Did these regions independently invent the same improbable technique? Or were they inheriting architectural principles passed down from a common source lost to time? Some researchers propose that ancient builders used lost technologies, sound-based levitation, thermal fracturing, or unknown tools capable of cutting stone with surgical precision. Others suggest that the true technology was simply knowledge, a deep understanding of geology, mathematics, and resonance. Whatever the explanation, the results are undeniable. These structures exist. They are not myth. They defy the expected timeline, and they reveal a sophistication that appears abruptly rather than gradually. One of the most persistent mysteries connecting global megalithic sites is their alignment to Earth's energy grids, patterns of magnetic, gravitational, and geological anomalies that repeat across the planet. Many major monuments sit at the intersection of these energetic hotspots. Pyramids in Egypt and Mexico, stone circles in Britain, temples in Cambodia, and megalithic complexes in Peru all appear strategically positioned along these invisible pathways. Whether the ancients used these networks for spiritual, acoustic, astronomical, or technological purposes remains unknown. But the consistency suggests intention, not coincidence. The deeper researchers study these alignments, the more they resemble a global blueprint, one that no known civilization could have drawn alone. Some claim these positioning choices optimized energy resonance. Others believe they reflect knowledge of Earth's geometry encoded into architecture. Whatever the truth, it hints at a unifying thread woven through cultures separated by oceans, suggesting they did not reinvent civilization independently. They were tapping into the same memory, and this memory did not belong solely to the stones. Myths from around the world speak of a time when the gods walked among men, not deities, but beings of great knowledge, often described as survivors of an earlier age. The Sumerians wrote of the Apkallu, wise beings who brought laws and architecture after a flood. The Egyptians told of the Shemsu Hor, followers of Horus who ruled before the first pharaoh. The Greeks wrote of titans and flood survivors. Indigenous cultures of the Americas speak of tall, pale-skinned teachers arriving from drowned lands to rebuild order. These accounts vary in detail, yet share a common thread. Someone older, someone surviving catastrophe, carried the remnants of forgotten knowledge into the birth of later civilizations. Even if these stories are embellished, their consistency is telling. Cultures invent myths to explain natural forces, but they do not invent the same myth unless they share a deeper inheritance. The simplest explanation is also the most unsettling. The teachers remembered in global mythology were survivors of an earlier civilization, one capable of monumental engineering, astronomical calculation, and architectural mastery. Their knowledge did not come from divine inspiration. It came from memory of a world that no longer existed. When those survivors scattered after the collapse, they carried fragments, techniques for cutting stone, principles for aligning temples to the heavens, understanding of cycles in earth and sky. Over generations, the fragments splintered. Some were preserved in monumental architecture. Others were encoded in myth, and others vanished entirely. What remains today are the ruins, silent, immense, impossible to ignore. They do not tell us everything, but they tell us enough. They reveal that humanity has not been climbing a single ladder toward civilization. It has been rediscovering, rebuilding, reawakening pieces of a legacy almost erased. The world we inhabit is not the first to master stone, sky, and geometry. It is simply the latest to remember. If the monuments that still stand are the echoes of civilizations that rose before our own, then the faintest but most enduring traces of those forgotten worlds are not carved into stone or buried beneath the sea. They are carried inside us. Long before archaeologists uncovered megaliths or sonar revealed drowned cities, the human genome held secrets of survivors who lived through upheavals so catastrophic that they reshaped not just landscapes, but biology itself. These genetic fragments behave like quiet messages smuggled across time, passed from parent to child through ages of stability and chaos, waiting for conditions familiar enough to the past to stir them awake again. When geneticists began mapping variations across global populations, they expected to find patterns tied to climate, altitude, or diet. And in most cases, they did. Adaptations for surviving cold winters, for thriving in oxygen-thin mountains, for digesting agricultural foods. But hidden among these expected signatures was something stranger, a cluster of traits so rare and so widely scattered that they made no sense in the context of known human migrations. This cluster appears in less than 1/2% of the global population. Too rare for random chance, too consistent to be coincidence, and far too unusual to fit within the ordinary branches of human ancestry. These markers appear in places that should have no connection to one another. Highland groups in India, isolated coastal tribes in Southeast Asia, indigenous Australians in the far north, a handful of populations clinging to mountain valleys, and even among the Basque people of Western Europe. These groups do not share language, climate, or lifestyle, yet they share traits that behave as if inherited from the same ancient source, traits that seem designed for survival in a world on the edge of collapse. The markers influence several unusual characteristics. One enhances resistance to hypoxia, allowing individuals to function in environments where oxygen is limited, conditions resembling volcanic winters or periods of global cooling. Another improves physical endurance during extreme stress, as though the body learned to conserve energy when the world turned hostile. A third affects the brain itself, increasing activity in areas responsible for spatial awareness, environmental mapping, and instinctive navigation. These abilities do not imply superior intelligence. Instead, they resemble an inherited intuition, a memory of landscapes that no longer exist, of coastlines swallowed by the sea, of skies filled with ash. It is the neurological aspect that draws the most curiosity. Individuals with this cluster often show an uncanny ability to orient themselves in unfamiliar environments, as if guided by a quiet internal compass. Some retain heightened sensitivity to shifts in weather or atmospheric pressure. Others show remarkably fast pattern recognition in natural terrains, mountains, coastlines, river deltas, even star fields overhead. These traits behave not like recent adaptations, but like the last remnants of a world where environmental awareness meant survival. Anthropologists attempted to link these traits to known events, ancient migrations, interbreeding with archaic human groups, genetic bottlenecks in harsh climates. But each explanation falls apart. The populations do not align with altitudes. They do not match the range of archaic hominins. They do not share a climate severe enough to justify such adaptations. Instead, the pattern forms a different shape, one that mirrors the distribution of ancient flood myths, drowned coastlines, and regions believed to have been inhabited before the last great sea level rise. In these regions, the stories are always the same. Ancestors fled rising water. They escaped from burning skies. They crossed landscapes that no longer exist. They carried fragments of knowledge from a world destroyed. Their descendants still whisper tales of the cataclysm, shaped by time but unmistakable in their origins. The genetic evidence aligns with these myths in unsettling ways. Some markers affect metabolic pathways that become more active during prolonged cold or darkness, conditions associated with volcanic winters or cosmic impacts. Others resemble adaptations found in deep-diving mammals, as though survival once required dealing with pressure changes or extended periods without sunlight. One particular marker shows traces of ancient selective pressure, an evolutionary nudge that does not align with any climate event of the last 50,000 years. That pressure, whatever its source, shaped those who lived through it. Their children carried the imprint forward, even as the world around them changed into something unrecognizable. Yet the most disturbing revelation emerged only recently. Epigenetic analysis, markers that reveal which genes are actively used, shows that this ancient cluster is becoming more active in modern populations. Environmental factors such as rising carbon dioxide levels, shifting weather patterns, and magnetic field fluctuations appear to trigger the very pathways tied to ancestral survival. It is as if the genome recognizes patterns long buried, preparing itself for conditions that resemble those of a previous collapse. Biology, in its quiet way, remembers. If earlier civilizations rose and fell along with Earth's cycles, then the survivors of each collapse would carry traits that helped them endure the aftermath: the sudden freeze, the long darkness, the poisoned air, the drowned land. Over tens of thousands of years, many of these traits would fade. But a few, those deeply embedded in human necessity, could persist as genetic embers waiting for the right conditions to ignite again. This perspective reframes human history. Instead of a single continuous rise from simplicity to complexity, humanity becomes a species shaped by repeated resets, hardened by catastrophe, adapted by force, and haunted by memories encoded in bone and blood. The sudden leaps in early architecture, astronomy, and agriculture begin to make sense if small groups survived each collapse, carrying their knowledge forward in fragments. When the world stabilized, those fragments resurfaced, guiding the next civilization toward mastery without the gradual evolution textbooks describe. They were not inventing the foundations of civilization, they were remembering them. This memory appears not only in DNA, but also in stories. Stories so ancient they predate writing, carried across millennia by voices around fires, carved into stone, embedded in rituals. Nearly every culture speaks of a golden age before the catastrophe, a time when humans possessed knowledge beyond their means, given to them by beings who survived earlier worlds. Whether these beings were gods, sages, or refugees from a drowned civilization is irrelevant. What matters is the consistency. Knowledge flowed from the survivors to the reborn world. This genetic inheritance also helps explain why humanity rebounds quickly after catastrophe. After the Younger Dryas cooling event, populations exploded across newly habitable lands. After massive volcanic eruptions, agriculture re-emerged with surprising speed. After sea levels stabilized, monumental architecture appeared almost instantly across multiple continents. These rebounds suggest a species recovering from amnesia, not one learning from scratch. And if humanity has endured multiple collapses before, then its resilience may not be accidental. It may be built into the genome itself. But this interpretation leads to an even deeper question, perhaps the most unsettling of all. If these ancient adaptations are stirring once more, if biological memory is awakening in response to environmental changes, what does that say about our moment in time? The same signs that preceded earlier collapses, magnetic drift, rapid climate oscillation, rising seas, are appearing again. Not gradually, not subtly, but with the same abrupt movements recorded in both myth and geology. The genome may not fear, but it prepares. The past is not silent. It speaks through ruins, through myths, through the bottom of the sea, and through us. We are not merely descendants of the earliest farmers or builders. We are the heirs of survivors who lived through the fall of worlds and carried their memory into ours. The question now is not whether they existed. It is whether we are approaching the turning point they endured, and whether the fragments of their strength within us will be enough to face what comes next. If the scattered traits in our DNA are the fingerprints of ancient survivors, then the whispers preserved in myth, architecture, and the ocean floor are the remnants of their fallen worlds. But the civilizations that rose before ours were not defined only by their accomplishments. They were defined by their endings. And if we are to understand what truly came before, we must reconstruct those lost cultures not as distant curiosities, but as living societies shaped by landscapes, climates, and possibilities that no longer exist. Their ruins form a map, one that hints at the scale of their achievements, their connections, and the forces that erased them. When placed together, the clues begin to outline 6 distinct civilizations, each flourishing in an age when the world was younger. The seas were lower, and the climate followed rhythms modern humanity has forgotten. The first of these forgotten worlds once occupied what is now Southeast Asia, stretching across the vast landmass of Sundaland. During the last ice age, this region was not a scattered chain of islands, but a unified expanse of river valleys, plains, and coasts reaching from Thailand to Java. Its geography resembled the fertile lands where civilizations tend to form, with abundant resources, stable climate cycles, and strategic waterways. Geological surveys reveal ancient river systems carved into what is now the ocean floor, rivers comparable in scale to the Nile or the Indus. Sonar scans hint at rectilinear structures, grids, and terraces hidden beneath the shallow seas. Myths from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Pacific Islands speak of a drowned motherland, a place of origins swallowed by rising oceans. When sea levels surged at the end of the Younger Dryas, this entire civilization, if it existed, would have vanished within a generation, leaving only its highest settlements to seed new cultures across the region. Another ancient world seems to have risen in the heart of what is now the Sahara Desert. Long before dunes claimed the landscape, the Sahara was a lush savanna filled with lakes, rivers, and vast green plains. Rock art dating back thousands of years depicts boats gliding across wide lakes, herds of cattle tended by organized communities, and ceremonial gatherings that imply structured societies. Beneath the sand, radar surveys detect geometric anomalies, rectangles, circles, and straight lines, buried hundreds of feet deep, shapes that resemble the footprints of cities lost under millennia of drifting dunes. As the African humid period faded and the land dried into desert, any civilization flourishing there would have been forced to migrate or collapse entirely, leaving little trace except in the dreams and carved memories of those who fled. Far to the north, the vast region of Beringia once formed a landmass connecting Siberia to Alaska. It was no barren tundra, but a temperate grassland supporting dense populations of megafauna, and, likely, the humans who hunted them. This forgotten world may have sustained thriving communities, perhaps even complex ones, for thousands of years. Genetic patterns among northern indigenous groups show hints of ancient divergence that do not align with the standard migration timeline. If a civilization existed there, its ruin came not from flood, but from cold, glacial expansion that consumed the land and scattered its people into both continents. Their knowledge, shaped by survival in extreme climates, may have blended into early Arctic cultures and left faint imprints on the technological traditions that later appeared in the region. To the west, the Indus Valley, long celebrated for its advanced urban planning, reveals hints of an even older layer beneath the familiar ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Uniform bricks, precise city grids, and complex drainage systems appear fully developed at the very beginning of the archaeological record, as though inherited rather than invented. Some lower strata suggest earlier foundations more weathered and mysterious, predating the well-known civilization by centuries or even millennia. Myths from surrounding cultures speak of an age before the floods, an age when knowledge flowed from a source no longer remembered. If an earlier civilization did exist here, perhaps it fell to rising waters or abrupt climate shifts that forced its descendants into the plains, carrying fragments of their ancestral practices. Across the Mediterranean and its surrounding islands, ruins stand that seem to echo a world whose identity has been almost entirely erased. On Crete, Cyprus, Sardinia, and Malta, ancient structures bear architectural features distinct from nearby contemporaries. The temples of Malta, older than the pyramids, rise from the landscape with precision and sophistication that implies a master tradition. On Sardinia, the Nuraghi towers, enigmatic stone constructions, dot the land in patterns suggesting a highly organized culture. On Crete, the oldest layers of the Minoan civilization contain influences that do not match the later Bronze Age cultures of the region. These islands lie along shifting sea routes that would have flourished when the Mediterranean was lower during periods of cooler climate. The collapse of these cultures often aligns with abrupt environmental shifts, earthquakes, and possible tsunamis, natural forces capable of wiping coastal societies off the map. Yet perhaps the most enigmatic candidate for a lost civilization lies not in deserts or islands, but beneath the Amazon rainforest. Long considered inhospitable to large-scale societies, the Amazon has recently revealed vast networks of engineered landscapes through LiDAR scanning. Gridded road systems stretch for miles. Canals connect raised agricultural beds. Geometric earthworks, circles, squares, and lines form patterns too deliberate to be natural. These structures suggest not a scattering of tribes, but an organized culture capable of manipulating the environment on a monumental scale. Their civilization may have thrived during wetter climatic periods, only to be undone by drought, disease, or ecological collapse. The jungle, relentless and patient, consumed their cities until only faint geometric shadows remained beneath the canopy. Indigenous stories speak of great settlements swallowed by the forest, places of knowledge and danger remembered only by a few elders. What binds these 6 lost civilizations together is not geography or culture, but the nature of their disappearance. None fade gradually from the archaeological record. They vanish, suddenly, decisively, in patterns that echo global environmental shifts. In Sunderland, rising seas erase coastlines. In the Sahara, drying skies turn grassland to desert. In Beringia, cold swallows the land bridge. In the Indus Valley, floods and tectonic shifts transform fertile plains. In the Mediterranean, quakes and waves reshape entire regions. In the Amazon, the climate swings sharply, bringing drought that kills crops and weakens once thriving populations. Such losses create a silence so profound that only fragments survive. Stone foundations too heavy to be moved, myths too meaningful to be forgotten, genetic signatures carried by those who walked away from their ruined homes. These remnants, when woven together, reveal that humanity has not followed a singular path. It has lived through multiple eras, each rising in the brief interludes between environmental upheavals. Each time the world stabilized, survivors built anew. They carried stories of what came before, stories of a great flood, of a burning sky, of a frozen world, of a vanished homeland. Over generations, these stories transformed into myths. Their architectural traditions devolved into simpler forms. Their scientific knowledge eroded into symbols, rituals, and legends. By the time recorded history began, the memory of those earlier worlds had been softened into metaphor. The true scale of their civilizations was reduced to whispers. And yet, the influence of these lost civilizations can still be felt. Their descendants appear in cultural anomalies, the sudden emergence of stoneworking mastery, unexplained leaps in agriculture, and early calendars that track celestial cycles with uncanny precision. They appear in the geographic clustering of flood myths, in the alignments of ancient monuments, and in the faint but persistent traces of genetic adaptations that served their ancestors well during catastrophe. Most importantly, they appear in the cycles of rise and fall themselves. Each civilization, both ancient and modern, thrives during periods of relative environmental stability, and each faces collapse when the rhythms of Earth shift once more. If 6 worlds rose and fell before ours, then humanity as we know it stands at the crest of the 7th, with the 8th waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. The civilizations of the past are not dead. They are the unseen architecture beneath our own story, shaping it from below. Their ruins are not relics, they are warnings. Their silence is not absence. It is the echo of knowledge lost, urging us to listen before the cycle turns again. If entire civilizations once flourished and fell in the shadows of deep time, then what truly obscures their existence today is not only the violence of nature, but the silence imposed by human hands. The deeper researchers press into forbidden layers of archaeology, geology, and oral memory, the more they encounter a strange counterforce, one that does not reveal, but erases. It appears in the form of missing data, sudden reclassifications, sealed research sites, vanished artifacts, and academic careers quietly redirected away from dangerous conclusions. This pattern, subtle at first, grows clearer with each anomaly. For every ruin that surfaces, there seems to be an equal effort to bury it again, not beneath soil or ocean, but beneath bureaucracy, disbelief, and the official story. And the closer we look, the more deliberate this pattern becomes. The phenomenon is not new. Early explorers in the Mediterranean reported stone structures beneath the waves, only for their notes to disappear into institutional archives. Mid-century divers filmed geometric formations on the seafloor, but their footage was confiscated under the pretext of national security concerns. In South America, teams studying pre-Incan foundations noted stonework far beyond the abilities of known cultures, yet their reports were quietly withdrawn before publication. Even in the modern age, satellite images showing unusual formations are blurred without explanation or removed during database updates. Each incident can be dismissed individually. Together, they form a trail of disappearances too consistent to ignore. Researchers call this pattern the disappearing trail, a phenomenon in which discoveries that challenge the accepted timeline vanish before they can reshape historical understanding. The vanishing does not occur through overt censorship or dramatic interventions. Instead, it unfolds through mundane mechanisms: funding withdrawn, excavation permits denied, universities reassigning projects, photographs misplaced, samples lost in transit. Administrators offer innocent explanations: budget constraints, safety concerns, reclassification reviews. But the timing is always the same. The moment a discovery threatens to rewrite the story of humanity's past, obstacles emerge with uncanny efficiency. Consider the case of a diver exploring a submerged structure near the coast of India. He captured high-resolution images of stone columns rising from the seabed, their surfaces carved with patterns resembling early pre-Vedic symbols. When he submitted his findings to a research institute, the images were accepted for preliminary review. Weeks later, he was informed the files had been corrupted. Backup copies stored on multiple devices had also mysteriously failed. When he attempted to revisit the site, he discovered the waters had been designated a restricted zone. The justification, environmental restoration, did not match the scale of the closure. Similar stories appear across continents. An archaeologist in Turkey uncovered unusual metal fragments embedded in strata far older than any known metallurgical culture. The fragments were sent for analysis. Months passed without updates. When she inquired, the lab told her the samples had been misplaced during relocation. A researcher in South America documented the foundations of a massive structure beneath layers of volcanic ash. Before his report could be published, his funding was abruptly cut. When he tried to recover his equipment from the site, he found the area fenced off by military personnel, citing hazardous conditions. These incidents share one unsettling feature. The disappearances begin long before any peer-reviewed debate can occur. It is as though someone, somewhere, recognizes the danger of the findings faster than any academic committee could. And while such a pattern could arise from coincidence, the consistency suggests a larger design. Some argue the suppression stems from institutional inertia. Academia, they say, is built on consensus. Entire careers, departments, and funding streams rely on the stability of accepted narratives. If a discovery threatens to upend those narratives, resistance is natural. Others point to national interests. Underwater ruins and ancient technologies could have implications for territorial claims, strategic resources, or advanced engineering principles. Governments classify what they do not yet understand. But another explanation, more unsettling, lingers beneath the surface. That the suppression is not fragmented or reactionary, but organized. That the concealment of humanity's earlier cycles began not in the modern era, but in the aftermath of the last collapse. A tradition passed down through priesthoods, secret societies, or closed circles of scholars. Groups that believed the truth of previous worlds was too destabilizing for the civilizations that followed. This idea is not without precedent. Ancient cultures often guarded esoteric knowledge, transmitting it only to elites or initiates. Egyptian priesthoods restricted astronomical and mathematical texts. Mesopotamian scribes encoded historical accounts in symbolic language. Greek mystery schools preserved fragments of older teachings under strict secrecy. Even in Asia and the Americas, certain clans acted as custodians of ancestral memory, protecting stories that described destruction on a scale almost unimaginable. What if these traditions were not mere spiritual or philosophical systems? What if they were the last safeguards of a knowledge that surviving communities believed should not be widely known? Knowledge of cycles that ended civilizations, knowledge of technologies or practices that became dangerous when misused, knowledge of forces that shaped the rise and fall of worlds? If so, then the modern suppression may simply be the continuation of an ancient protocol. Protect stability, conceal the deeper truth, and allow each civilization to believe it is the first. The question then becomes, why hide such information? The most common answer offered is that it would destabilize society. If people learned that humanity had risen and fallen repeatedly, that even advanced civilizations could be swept away in generations, it could undermine confidence in governments, institutions, and the future itself. Economies could shake, religions could fracture. Political systems could falter under the weight of cosmic insignificance. The idea is paternalistic, but not implausible. Those in power often believe they protect the public by controlling information. yet the deeper possibility is darker. If earlier civilizations possessed technologies or energies unknown to us, if they interacted with Earth's magnetic fields, manipulated resonance, or harnessed natural forces in ways we cannot yet grasp, then rediscovering such capabilities without understanding their consequences could be disastrous. If ancient knowledge contributed to the collapse of previous worlds, then secrecy may be viewed by those who guard it as an act of preservation, not suppression. Whether the motive is stability, secrecy, or fear, the result is the same. Humanity today sees only the thinnest surface of its past. Beneath that surface lie ruins blocked from exploration, artifacts hidden from study, and research trails cut off before they can reach the public. What remains is a sanitized version of history, one safe enough to teach, stable enough to maintain, and incomplete enough to protect whoever benefits from the silence. But the world does not remain silent forever. As sonar scans improve, as satellite imaging becomes too decentralized to control, as independent researchers publish outside academic channels, the concealed fragments begin to reassemble. The pattern grows undeniable. Each reveal, each suppressed discovery, each vanished report contributes to a picture larger and more complex than the story humanity has been told. And as these pieces emerge, a realization forms at the edge of understanding. The forces that erased the ancient civilizations may not be finished. Their guardians may sense the pattern returning. The world may be approaching another turning point, another cycle, another moment when history does not merely bend, it breaks. The disappearing trail is not simply a barrier, it is a warning. Something has been hidden because something has been feared. And as the fragments accumulate, that fear becomes easier to understand. The past may not be finished with us. If the clues scattered across continents suggest that earlier civilizations rose and fell with the turning of Earth's great cycles, then understanding the nature of those cycles becomes essential, not as an abstract exercise, but as a way of interpreting the world unfolding around us. The deeper researchers look into paleoclimatology, geology, astronomy, and the long rhythms of planetary behavior, the more a recurring pattern emerges. Civilizations do not end randomly. They fall when the planet shifts, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently, but always decisively. And the signs of such a shift are not confined to the distant past. They are building again in real time, echoing the same precursors that preceded earlier collapses. Earth is not the stable cradle we imagine it to be. It tilts, wobbles, breathes in cycles of warmth and cold, expands and contracts its ice sheets, raises and lowers its seas, strengthens and weakens its magnetic shield. These oscillations unfold over thousands of years, some predictable, others chaotic, but all intertwined in ways modern science is only beginning to understand. Ancient builders knew these rhythms instinctively. Many monuments align with solstices, equinoxes, and precessional cycles. The slow rotation of Earth's axis over roughly 26,000 years. Some structures align not with present star positions, but with where those stars would have been tens of thousands of years ago. Such precision implies not primitive curiosity, but inherited knowledge of cosmic timing. Geologists studying ancient sediment layers find abrupt transitions marking global catastrophes. Some layers contain traces of soot and ash, indicating widespread firestorms. Others show rapid changes in ocean chemistry, pointing to massive meltwater influx. Ice cores reveal spikes in volcanic aerosols or cosmic dust, markers of eruptions or impacts severe enough to alter climate for centuries. In each case, the transition is sudden, the shift dramatic, and the implications enormous. Entire ecosystems reorganized, species vanished, sea levels surged, and in the midst of these upheavals, human populations appear to bottleneck, shrinking sharply before rebounding in new configurations. The archaeological record grows thin in these periods. Ruins vanish beneath rising seas or shifting deserts. The memory of what came before dissolves into myth. One of the most striking patterns in Earth's history is the repeated cycle of glacial and interglacial periods. Every 90,000 to 110,000 years, the planet shifts from ice to warmth with astonishing speed. At the end of each cycle, sea levels rise by hundreds of feet, coastlines drown, and climates shift so violently that entire regions become uninhabitable. During these transitions, the conditions are ripe for both the rise and the destruction of civilizations. If human cultures existed during earlier interglacial periods, and the evidence suggests they did, their low-lying settlements would now lie deep beneath the ocean, erased by the force of time. But climate alone does not drive collapse. Earth's magnetic field, the invisible barrier shielding the planet from cosmic radiation, waxes and wanes over millennia. During periods of magnetic weakening, radiation levels rise, potentially disrupting atmospheric patterns, electrical storms, and even biological systems. Some researchers propose that these magnetic downturns correlate with cultural collapses throughout history. Ancient structures aligned to magnetic north, rather than true north, exhibit orientation shifts that suggest builders noticed these fluctuations. In some myths, the sky changes direction, the sun rises where it once set, or the stars fall out of their places. These poetic descriptions match what would be observed during rapid geomagnetic drift. Volcanic activity follows cycles as well. Supervolcanoes leave ash deposits thousands of miles wide, darkening the skies and triggering volcanic winters that mimic nuclear fallout. A single eruption can drop global temperatures by several degrees. A shock powerful enough to devastate agriculture, trigger famine, and collapse societies. Ancient legends from North America, Asia, and Polynesia describe the year without summer, the ash that hid the sun, and the sky that turned the color of iron. For centuries, historians dismissed these descriptions as exaggerations. Only recently did scientists uncover evidence linking these tales to actual volcanic events. And then there are cosmic cycles, the slow but relentless dance of Earth through regions of the solar system dense with debris. As the planet moves through these clouds, meteor and comet impacts increase. Some impacts are small, others are catastrophic. The Younger Dryas boundary, for example, contains microtectites and high levels of platinum, signatures of an extraterrestrial event powerful enough to ignite global wildfires and plunge the planet into a 1,000-year freeze. If such events occurred multiple times in deep history, they could explain the abrupt endings of civilizations we can barely reconstruct. The question, then, is not whether Earth goes through destructive cycles, but how often humanity has survived them. The ruins we know, Göbekli Tepe, ancient flooding layers at Mesopotamian sites, megalithic complexes oriented to older skies, appear not as beginnings, but as recoveries, signs of societies reawakening after catastrophe. What we call the dawn of civilization may instead be the aftermath of a world forgotten. And now, as researchers compare the signals of the past with the present, an uncomfortable resonance emerges. The magnetic field is weakening faster than at any point in recorded history. Its north and south poles drift unpredictably. Ocean temperatures rise while currents destabilize. Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets fracture at accelerating rates. Sea levels creep higher, swallowing coastal communities. Extreme weather grows more violent and frequent. Volcanic fields once dormant show signs of new activity. Even cosmic debris encounters increase subtly, creating streaks of fire across the night sky that ancient peoples would have interpreted as omens. In isolation, each trend is concerning. Together they form a pattern strikingly similar to the precursors of earlier collapses. Scientists attempt to explain these changes through models of human influence, natural variability, or random fluctuations. But when compared with Earth's long cycles, the signals echo rhythms that ended previous eras. Cycles ancient survivors may have encoded into myths, calendars, and monumental alignments. Patterns we mistook as superstition may have been early warning systems. What makes this realization chilling is the speed at which modern civilization has expanded. Previous civilizations lived closer to the land, more dispersed, more adaptable. When catastrophe struck, survivors fled to mountains, caves, inland plains. Their populations were small enough to move, their technologies simple enough to rebuild from memory. Modern humanity, by contrast, is complex, global, and fragile. Cities concentrate millions along coastlines. Supply chains span continents. Energy grids pulse like exposed nerves. A shock that earlier societies might have endured could cripple our world in weeks. If the cycles are indeed returning, if Earth is moving into another period of transition, then the forgotten civilizations were not merely victims of ancient catastrophe. They were previews, warnings. Their ruins are not relics of a primitive past. They are the gravestones of worlds that reached heights we cannot fully grasp before being swept away. And yet, humanity today possesses one advantage those earlier civilizations may not have had: the ability to see the pattern. Modern science, mythology, architecture, genetics, and geology all converge on the same message. The cycle is real. It has happened before, and it does not care whether a civilization is prepared or not. What we choose to do with that knowledge will determine whether we become the next buried chapter or the first to survive the turning. The past is speaking through stone, fire, water, and memory. It has always spoken. The only question left is whether we finally learn to listen. If the cycles of destruction that shattered earlier civilizations are returning, then the most urgent question is not what happened in the distant past, but what traces of those worlds made it through the fire, flood, and ice to reach us today. The ruins that lie scattered across continents are only the physical remnants, but the intellectual and technological echoes of those forgotten ages may persist in forms we have overlooked. Fragments disguised as mythology, symbols embedded in religious traditions, architectural techniques preserved in rituals, and scientific principles encoded in stories so ancient that their meaning has eroded into allegory. To understand what humanity may be facing next, we must examine what the survivors of earlier cycles attempted to preserve, and what they may have been warning us about. Ancient cultures often speak of knowledge keepers, individuals or groups entrusted with preserving wisdom through catastrophes. These figures appear under different names: the Apkallu of Mesopotamia, the Shemsu-Hor of Egypt, the sages of India, the civilizing heroes of the Americas. But their roles are strikingly similar. They emerge after a great destruction, carrying fragments of an earlier world, teaching agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and order to societies struggling to rebuild. Their appearance is always sudden, their origins mysterious, their knowledge immense. Whether literal or symbolic, they represent the transfer of memory from a fallen civilization to a rising one. Consider the Sumerian Apkallu, half-human, half-fish sages who emerge from the sea after a flood to restore civilization. Scholars call them myth. But in a world where rising seas swallowed coastlines and erased cities, the imagery of beings from the water could simply describe survivors who fled a drowned homeland. Their teachings, writing, measurement, laws, and agriculture mirror the sudden leaps humanity experienced after the Younger Dryas. The Sumerians insisted this knowledge was inherited, not invented. Their tablets do not show gradual development. They show a culture rebuilding with fragments of something older. A similar pattern appears in ancient Egypt. The earliest dynasties display sudden architectural mastery, monumental stonework, astronomical alignments, mathematical precision, skills that then deteriorate over time. Egyptian priests spoke of earlier ages ruled by the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus, who lived in the time before time after a great catastrophe. They were said to have preserved the remnants of a lost world. Some accounts place their rule thousands of years before the first pharaohs. Whether literal or metaphorical, the message is clear. The civilization known to history was not an origin, but an inheritance. In India, Vedic texts describe cycles of creation and destruction, spanning vast periods, punctuated by floods, firestorms, and celestial upheavals. They speak of earlier ages when humans possessed extraordinary knowledge, astronomy capable of tracking planetary cycles with uncanny accuracy, mathematics that anticipated modern principles, and architecture aligned to cosmic patterns. These texts portray humanity not as a young species ascending toward greatness, but as one of many worlds rising and falling in endless succession. They're stories of civilizing heroes, figures who emerge after catastrophe to restore order, mirror the Apkallu and the Shemsu-Hor almost exactly. In the Americas, legends from the Andes to the Great Lakes recount survivors of a previous age who traveled across newly reshaped landscapes, teaching skills to scattered tribes. Some describe tall, fair-skinned beings, others dark-haired travelers bearing stone tools or celestial knowledge. Regardless of the details, the structure is identical. A world ends, chaos reigns, and then a few survivors or wandering sages rebuild civilization using remnants of forgotten wisdom. Even Polynesian traditions, preserved across islands separated by thousands of miles of ocean, tell of lands swallowed by the sea and navigators who carried ancestral knowledge of stars, winds, and currents. Their wayfinding skills, now admired for their precision, may have been fragments of a maritime civilization erased long before their oldest genealogies were recorded. Taken individually, these stories might be dismissed as cultural fantasy, but taken together across continents, languages, and millennia, they describe the same cycle. A great destruction followed by the sudden appearance of knowledge-bearers. Their consistency suggests something more than metaphor. It suggests memory memory so ancient that its original context has faded, leaving behind only symbolic survivors carrying remnants of a lost world. The question, then, is what exactly these survivors preserved. The most obvious remnants appear in stone: monuments aligned to celestial events, structures that encode mathematical ratios, and megaliths that interact with Earth's magnetic or acoustic properties. But beyond stone lies something subtler: the preservation of cycles themselves. Many ancient cultures possessed astonishingly accurate calendars tracking long-term astronomical patterns. The Maya calculated the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, long before modern astronomy rediscovered it. The ancient builders of Nabta Playa aligned stone circles to star positions corresponding to epochs thousands of years before the site was constructed. Egyptian temples incorporate alignments reflecting precessional ages, suggesting a knowledge of celestial cycles spanning tens of thousands of years. These orientations are not random. They serve as markers, anchors to the sky that encode when the last cycle ended and hint at when the next one will begin. Why track such vast periods unless the memory of a previous catastrophe compelled them to prepare for another? Other remnants lie in mathematics. The ratio of the Great Pyramid's height to its base approximates the value of p and encodes the golden ratio. Its dimensions reflect the curvature of Earth, the distance to the Sun, and the length of the precessional cycle. These are not coincidences. They resemble an attempt to preserve scientific constants in a form that could survive flood, fire, and the collapse of writing. Stone endures where parchment burns. Geometry survives where languages die. More remnants hide in mythic symbolism. Serpent imagery associated with the sky appears in cultures worldwide. In some myths, the serpent brings knowledge. In others, it represents cosmic danger. Comets, meteor streams, or celestial events that once brought destruction. The feathered serpent of Mesoamerica, the serpent temples of India, the dragon lines of China, the rainbow serpents of Australia, all may represent encoded memories of celestial cycles and cosmic disruptions. When writing is lost, stories preserve what cannot be expressed any other way. Yet the most haunting remnants are those found within humanity itself. The rare genetic cluster that enhances survival under extreme environmental stress appears disproportionately in regions linked to ancient catastrophe. Populations near submerged coastlines, volcanic fields, or glacial margins carry traits as if inherited from ancestors who lived through the collapse of earlier worlds. These traits behave not as random mutations but as biological memories, silent preparations for conditions that once shaped civilization's fall. And now, these dormant markers are activating again, responding to environmental signals, rising temperatures, shifting magnetic fields, atmospheric instability. Whether by coincidence or by the rhythm of Earth's cycles, biology is preparing for change. This convergence, mythic memory, genetic activation, geological patterns, astronomical cycles, suggests that ancient knowledge was not merely the record of a lost civilization. It was a warning encoded across generations. The survivors of earlier collapses may have understood that the forces which destroyed their worlds were not anomalies, but recurring events. They preserved what they could in stone, story, sky, and blood. They left us clues because they believed another cycle would come. Today, as sea levels rise, weather destabilizes, volcanic activity increases, and the magnetic field weakens, humanity stands in the same position their ancestors once faced. The signs align with the patterns carved into temples and encoded in myths. The same precursors that preceded earlier collapses now unfold across the globe. And as the physical world shifts, the remnants of ancient civilizations whisper the same haunting truth. The cycle is not finished. The question is no longer whether earlier civilizations existed, but whether we will understand their warnings before we join them in the silence of forgotten ages. If the remnants preserved in myth, stone, and blood are warnings carried across the rise and fall of forgotten worlds, then the final truth is not about the past at all. It is about the threshold we now stand upon. The ancient cycles are no longer distant echoes in geological strata or celestial mechanics. They are unfolding around us in real time, accelerating in ways earlier civilizations could never have measured, but always feared. And as the signs intensify, humanity faces a choice no generation has confronted with such clarity: to repeat the pattern or to finally break it. Throughout history, civilizations collapsed quietly at first, a shift in the wind patterns, a drought lasting a few seasons more than expected, a volcanic plume drifting farther than predicted, a strange chill settling over summer fields. No single omen ever felt like the turning point. But together, they formed a silent countdown, one that earlier cultures failed to recognize until their cities were already empty and their monuments already swallowed by sand or sea. Today, the world is experiencing a similar convergence. Heat waves scorch regions that were once temperate. Ice sheets fragment and slip into the ocean like calving stone giants. Storms grow stronger, stranger, more unseasonal. Oceans warm faster than models predicted. Weather patterns shift with a volatility unmatched in recorded history. Animals migrate in disoriented patterns. Forests burn with unprecedented scale. Entire ecosystems shift within a single human lifetime. These transformations are often framed as environmental or political issues, subjects of debate or denial. But through the lens of deep time, they resemble the preludes to earlier collapses, a world approaching a pivot point. The Earth does not change evenly or politely. It leaps, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, through abrupt transitions that leave civilizations disoriented, fragmented, and exposed. Our ancestors witnessed such transitions. Their myths faithfully preserved the terror of a sky darkened for years, winds that carried fire instead of rain, oceans swallowing land, and land buckling under the weight of ice. Their stories survive because the cycle they endured was not subtle. It was absolute. One of the most striking parallels between then and now is the weakening of Earth's magnetic field. Measurements show it has been declining at a rate faster than at any time in recorded history. The magnetic North Pole drifts unpredictably, accelerating toward Siberia. During previous declines, Earth experienced heightened radiation exposure, atmospheric instability, and shifts in electrical storms. Some researchers theorize that magnetic weakening correlates with evolutionary leaps or cultural disruptions. Ancient temple orientations, once aligned to magnetic north, now tilt off by degrees that imply a shifting magnetic environment. If the field continues to drop, humanity may face electrical disturbances, increased cosmic radiation, and atmospheric changes that earlier civilizations may have encoded in myth as the sky changing direction or the world losing its shield. Volcanic fields show heightened activity as well. Long-dormant regions now exhibit tremors. Supervolcanoes, though unlikely to erupt imminently, release chemical signatures indicating deep unrest. Even moderate eruptions can trigger cooling events, crop failures, and climate instability. Past civilizations collapsed under far less stress. A single volcanic winter could test the resilience of modern global infrastructure in ways previous societies never had to confront. Rising seas echo another ancient trigger. Coastal cities, where a significant percentage of humanity now lives, mirror the vulnerable coastal settlements of forgotten worlds. When sea levels surged at the end of the last glacial age, entire civilizations were erased within decades. Families fled inland, carrying fragments of memory that eventually became flood myths. Today, with oceans rising faster than anticipated, modern humanity faces a challenge earlier cultures could not outrun. Unlike those long-lost settlements, however, our coastal cities are hubs of commerce, governance, and technology. Their loss would cripple economies and fracture societies. Cosmic cycles also return in subtle ways. Earth's orbit carries it through regions of increased meteoric debris. Fireballs streak across skies more frequently than in past decades. Though most burn harmlessly, the rise in activity resembles transitional periods recorded in ancient lore, eras when the sky fell, when stones of fire rained from the heavens, when celestial events, now understood as impacts or near misses, triggered floods, fires, or climate shifts. The Younger Dryas boundary layer, a global marker of sudden freezing and mass extinctions, is filled with microscopic impact debris. If such an event contributed to the fall of earlier civilizations, then the current increase in cosmic activity is not a trivial detail. It is part of a pattern. Meanwhile, humanity's own technological expansion adds a new variable to the ancient rhythm. Earlier civilizations may have wielded forms of knowledge or energy now lost, but none reached planetary-scale interconnection. Modern society is woven together by a delicate web of electricity, communication, supply chains, and digital infrastructure. A disturbance in any one of these systems, whether triggered by geomagnetic storms, environmental collapse, or social upheaval, could cascade into global instability. Earlier civilizations collapsed into regional darkness. Ours could collapse into a darkness far more complete, yet the cycle does not imply inevitability. The survivors of the past left their warnings in the only forms capable of enduring tens of thousands of years: monumental architecture, mythic symbolism, encoded cycles in calendars and alignments, and perhaps even adaptations embedded in our genome. These remnants suggest that the ancient world did not want to doom its successors to ignorance. They believed the cycle could be anticipated, and perhaps, with anticipation, it could be survived. The most powerful lesson preserved across myths is that collapse did not come instantly. It arrived in waves, omens, disruptions, fractures, followed by a decisive event. In some stories, a chosen group was guided to safety, to mountain shelters, to hidden valleys, to high plateaus where the floods could not reach. In others, knowledge was preserved in stone, in song, in ritual, carried by those who understood that only memory could rebuild the world after devastation. These survivors became the teachers of the next age, the architects of rebirth, the mysterious figures who appear suddenly in early records with knowledge far beyond their time. Today, humanity stands in a position those survivors could only dream of. We have the ability to detect magnetic drift, track cosmic debris, model climate systems, analyze geological cores, and decode the genetic whispers of ancestors who lived through earlier catastrophes. We can see the signs with a clarity no previous civilization possessed. But clarity alone does not guarantee action. Awareness without preparation is merely another form of blindness. If the cycle is truly returning, and the evidence suggests it is, then the path forward requires a new perspective, not panic, not denial, but humility and intention. The understanding that the world we have built, magnificent as it is, stands on foundations weakened by forces older than civilization itself. If earlier worlds rose and fell, then ours is neither exceptional nor exempt. But it can be different. We can learn from the survivors who came before us. We can prepare not by hoarding resources or retreating into fear, but by strengthening the resilience of communities, preserving knowledge in durable forms, diversifying where we live and how we grow food, and designing technologies capable of withstanding the instability ahead. The eighth civilization does not have to be a tale of ruin. It can be the first world to face the cycle with open eyes, to recognize the signs without collapsing into superstition or denial, to hold on to its knowledge rather than lose it to the sea, sky, or fire. But to do this, humanity must accept a truth ancient survivors encoded for us, that the earth remembers its rhythms, and those rhythms do not bend for civilization. They shape it, test it, and ultimately renew it. The ruins beneath our feet are not merely the graves of forgotten ages. They are mirrors held up to the present. They show what happens when a world mistakes stability for permanence. And they hint at what might happen if, this time, we choose to remember rather than forget. If we listen closely to the monuments, the myths, the scattered artifacts, the restless climate, the shifting sky, and the silent memory in our DNA, we may realize that the cycle is not a threat, but a teacher. What it demands is not fear, but understanding. What it offers is not doom, but the possibility of rebirth. And what it asks of us is simple: to look beyond the horizon with the courage that earlier civilizations lost in their final moments. The past has spoken. The future waits. And the present is our chance to step off the path that consumed 6 worlds before ours, and to become the first civilization that learns how to stand when the earth begins to turn again.